This video contains spoilers for Inside Job. I adore Inside Job. I've watched the first season at least 5 times. I love a lot of the characters. I admire the effort they put into the world building. And I'm overall happy that adult animation kinda has a new Gravity Falls. With a comedy that starts out episodic but gradually builds up to an epic overarching story. There's just one problem. It's too short. Oh, and all the references. And not short in an oh my god I need more way, although that is true. Rather, it's short in a I like what you're trying to do, but you needed more time to do it kind of way. If you ask me, it's the show's biggest flaw, and it's entirely out of their control. In only 18 episodes, Inside Job has committed to multiple changes with the status quo, from who's in charge of Cognito Inc., to the leader of the team, to Reagan getting recruited by the mysterious Shadow Board. And while I was on board with all of this, I can't say I was emotionally invested in everything. Why? To make a long story short, they needed more episodes. And to make a short story long, well, you're watching the right video. The best place to start is to talk about the number of episodes. Netflix had initially ordered Inside Job for 20 episodes back in 2019. These 20 episodes presumably being split into what would be known as Part 1 and 2. But if you take a look at Part 2, you'll notice there's only 8 episodes. What happened? Well, in June 2022, it was announced that Inside Job got renewed for a second season. Yeah, Part 2 technically isn't Season 2. I know, it's kind of confusing. Although they didn't specify how many episodes would be in Season 2, I don't think Netflix can afford another 20. Seeing how things are going right now with both Netflix and the animation industry, it's way more likely the streaming giant only ordered 8 to 10 episodes for Season 2, aka Part 3. Oh, I'm sorry, Part THB. Given where Part 2 left off, I wouldn't be surprised if the next season is more ambitious than the last 2 combined. So to make sure they have enough time for a satisfying arc and a potential conclusion, they may have moved 2 of those initial 20 episodes over to the next season. But if that's true, doesn't it highlight the problem with these short-ass seasons? Especially for animation, the medium that allows for the most ambitious, larger-than-life stories possible? If Part 2's number of episodes really suffered for the benefit of another season, then Netflix's approach to the number of episodes they give a show like Inside Job is inherently flawed. It feels like a mix of saving money and wanting people to finish a season as quickly as possible. Netflix has always thrived off of binge culture, which worked best in the early years of original content. Back when seasons were about 12 to 13 episodes, with some shows clocking in half-hour episodes and others clocking in at an hour-long episode. Not too different from cable. However, as Netflix put out more scripted originals, a lot of consumers felt like that binging was starting to feel like a slog, because storylines that may have only needed a few episodes had to be stretched out to fill a whole season. But I feel like this really was an issue with shows that were an hour long instead of 30 minutes. Nowadays, it feels like we're dealing with the opposite problem. In recent years, we've seen the rise of a lot of 8-episode seasons on streaming, mainly because it saves them money. And while that pacing works a lot better for shows that have hour-long episodes, it's done a lot of harm to half-hour shows, in my opinion. For example, going beyond the realm of animation, I fucking love the show Barry on HBO. HBO, while already its own channel prior to streaming services, had a lot of shows with only 8-episode seasons, but those tend to be an hour long. Barry is only a half hour, a measly 30 minutes. And as a result, their story only gets 3 to 4 hours to be told, while everyone else gets to be hot shit with their 7 to 8 hours. That's a school day. That's a long time. Oh, your Widow season can be binged in a whole afternoon?
Try giving up a whole night's rest, bozo.
And I don't even want to talk about anime, bro. Don't even bring up One Piece. While I hold Barry in high regards, my only gripe with that show is that after season 1, they have so many moving pieces that I'm always left feeling like they needed a few more episodes to flesh things out. And I've seen other fans of the show feel the same way. So when bringing it back to Inside Job, 10 episodes in season 1 and 8 in season 2 weren't nearly enough for me, because I went from meeting these characters to dealing with their status quo shattering developments within 3 hours. And I still don't know most of them that well. Like, these characters are fun, but I barely know some of them. I think the first time I really felt like this was episode 9, as it's the first half of a 2-part season finale, or mid-season finale, however you want to look at parts 1 and 2. So to usher us in that season finale atmosphere, you have the Shadow Board looking to recruit JR, rewarding us for watching this far by finally digging into the show's greatest mystery. And at the same time, you have Reagan and the team wanting to be recognized for their hard work. These both feel like natural accumulations of the story. Like, if you told me after episode 1 this is what the season finale would be about, I wouldn't be surprised. Yet I feel like I'm not as fired up for the team as the show wants me to be, because I just met them, and the focus for most of the season was on Reagan, Brett, and Rand. A decision that makes sense when you see where they take things in part 2, but Gigi, Glenn, Andre, and Mike are practically all sidelined, with their bits of character development squeezed in wherever they can fit. I know they all get their flowers in part 2, but I'm only referring to part 1 right now. None of them at this point had an A plot like the 3 characters the show clearly wants us to focus on the most. No moments where they're shown to be vulnerable and real people deep down, like Reagan and Brett. The closest thing was sober Andre, but it was played off more like a gag instead of the focus. So I don't feel anything for their dope varsity jackets, beyond, I need to wear it. Where can I buy this? Let's compare this to Gravity Falls, for obvious reasons. The first episode of the 2-part season finale is built around Dipper's frustration with Grunkle Stan, something that I was able to feel invested in because at that point, they were butting heads for 18 episodes. Not to mention that season 1 of the show took like a year to air. But even on a binge watch, that's double the length to get invested into the Pines family dynamic than the team's dynamic in Inside Job. Dipper and Stan's back and forth, and Stan's overall sketchiness had time to marinate in my head and cement itself as a long-running conflict. Now, don't get me wrong, having the context of both parts 1 and 2, I don't think Inside Job needed to trade any of those Reagan, Brett, or Rand episodes for other characters. But I know Netflix goofed up, not giving them the standard 26 episodes, so at least Gigi, Andre, and Mike could have an episode where they get to star in an A-plot. Which brings me to... So you may be asking, okay, internet rant man, so what makes these 4 characters underdeveloped compared to these 3? Well, Reagan, Brett, and Rand all feel like real people. We know a lot about their history, their families, what makes them tick, and why they behave the way they do. We know about Reagan's dysfunctional childhood, where her father always tried to control her while substituting his presence with technology. And her mother, Tomiko, who was only focused on her own happiness, constantly acting on her own self-interest. All of this led to Reagan developing poor social skills, a cynical outlook on life, and an inability to connect with others. In her adult life, she has an obsession towards her own career because it's where she places all of her self-worth, and her relationship with science has been the only solid relationship in her life. We know Brett's a people pleaser because he was the black sheep of a very rich, very successful family. He just wants to be accepted by a group of people, even if it means being manipulated by those people. Something he thought he got in college with his frat, but he learned early in the series that was nothing but smoke and mirrors, and that in reality, his frat bros couldn't wait for the day where they never had to see him again. Brett dedicated his life to molding himself into the most likable, charismatic person imaginable for people who were never willing to give him a chance in the first place. Rand is a victim of his own hubris and his paranoia, as he got in the way of all of his significant relationships, viewing himself as a god and thinking he knows what's best for everyone around him. His actions cost him Cognito, his wife, and a healthy relationship with his daughter, something he internalized as he 4D chessed his way back into regaining control of Cognito and desperately tried to get the family back together, putting even the fabric of reality at risk in order to make it happen. So where the hell are all these tragic anime backstories for everyone else? I'm sure you've been waiting for me to mention this, but part 2 did give Mike a substantial amount of development with his high school reunion episode, confirming a lot of lore around his species and establishing that he was a loser in high school. He's another social reject. That's good, that's progress. And kind of a pleasant surprise since, although he is one of the funniest characters, he was also the most shallow when it came to the main team. As for Gigi, Andre, and Glenn, it really feels like they all have the seeds planted for some really good character exploration and development, yet the show uses those seeds as vehicles for more jokes rather than really digging into them. Unlike Reagan, Rand, and Brett, whose characteristics are often used for jokes while still retaining depth. Gigi is someone you think would have a much larger role and arc in the series. Given her role as head of media manipulation for Cognito Inc., she's actually competent at her job and constantly tries to get poached by the Illuminati until she gets roasted by them in part 2.
If you need us, we'll be in the room where it happens.
Where what happens?
If you have to ask, honey, you'll never know.
I was hoping this would unravel some sort of arc where she desperately tries to prove herself to the Illuminati before realizing she's better off without them and it isn't worth sacrificing her dignity. It also would have fit in nicely with part 2's themes of trying so hard to make something work, but ultimately having to let it go, as it's healthier for both parties involved. I mean, imagine an episode where Gigi convinces Stradler to try to wipe the Illuminati's memories of her so she could get a clean slate and hijinks ensue. There was a setup for something great here. Instead, it's just kind of never brought up again until the Mandela Effect episode, one of the standouts of the season, in which there's a timeline where she rules the Illuminati.
Lin-Manuel, start rapping about how much you suck.
Yes, Queen.
Listen, it's a good joke. It's a great joke even, but it just screams wasted potential. Like, why does Gigi strive for something greater, or at least something she views as greater? Is there anything in her past that informed that version of her we see today? Did she miss out on a major opportunity in her past that made her never want to settle for less again? These are things I want to know about her that I believe would help her feel like a more fleshed out character, and that's kind of how I feel about the other two. We know Andre is a drug addict, and we know he's an absolute wreck when he's sober, but why? What series of events in his past made him turn to drugs in the first place? And is there any chance of him reeling it in so he can be better at his job and grow as a character? We know Glenn is a veteran. He struggles with self-image issues, went through a divorce, and almost took his own life if he wasn't saved by Grassy Knoll. But there really hasn't been a through line with his character that makes this all connect. I'm actually surprised they didn't do anything with Dolores in part 2, given that he could have bonded with Rand over wanting to get their wives back. Now, sure, not every character needs a major backstory, but I think it sticks out with these characters in particular because they're a part of the main crew. I mean, look at Futurama, right? A show that Inside Job initially reminded me of with the whole sci-fi workplace dynamic. Sure, not everyone on the Planet Express crew is on the level of Fry and Leela when it comes to development, but we understand why they're the way they are. Because they had plenty of episodes to explore the team dynamics, and for everyone to have an episode of their own. I rambled on enough about this. I really don't want to give the impression that I don't like these characters. I do. I wouldn't have rewatched the show so many times if I didn't. I just think it's important to highlight these disadvantages of a shorter episode count for a show like this, especially when characters are arguably the most important part of a show. This all takes me to the final thing I want to talk about: pacing. As I said in the beginning of this video, Inside Job has a lot of status quo changes in a short amount of time, and while everything that happens makes sense for the narrative, the short episode count made it hard for things to land perfectly, though I'm really specifically talking about everything with Cognito. I want to kick off this section with some positives and highlight what the show was able to execute very well with its short episode order. I think part 2 knocked it out of the park when it came to Reagan and Stadler's relationship and Rand spiraling, because these were character arcs that were built up since the very beginning. We always knew Reagan had trouble in relationships, and we always knew Rand still had a thing for Tomiko. We see Rand put his best foot forward to woo her on multiple occasions, and the only time it works is when it's not him. Not to mention, he literally says what his end goal is in the first episode of this part, like he was never trying to hide it.
Then Cognito's gonna reclaim its ex-wife, and its daughter, and its original beautiful hairline.
But we just assume wanting to get back with Tomiko or Reagan's good graces is just more of him being a control freak than him having a genuine longing for his family. But Reagan and Ron Stadler are clearly the stars in these new episodes. So let's really dig into them. After having 2 episodes in part 1 focused around Reagan's fumbling the bag when it came to dating, it makes sense that the 3rd time would be the charm, and Reagan would land an ongoing relationship with Ron. And I can't lie, they're cute together. I like watching them bring a semblance of joy out of each other. While the relationship could have lasted for more than 8 episodes, I think this was actually the perfect amount for the relationship to serve its purpose in the story without really feeling rushed. It definitely feels like a breath of fresh air just because of how dragged out relationships tend to be in shows. The will they, won't they breaking up and getting back together, or just the weird ways to give them drama after they're together. Jim and Pam, Nick and Jess, Sadie and Lars, the disaster that was Mordecai's love life. It's a dreaded immortal trope that lives on today with banger shows like Abbott Elementary. Here it takes about 1/3 of the season, or part, for them to get together, 1/3 for them to be together and try to ignore the friction their 2 worlds bring to the relationship, and 1/3 for their relationship to be put to the test and for Reagan to accept that it's better for the 2 of them to let go. I didn't cry. You're crying, shut up. Honestly, I think it works because it's close to rom-com pacing. Like, this really felt like a pseudo love letter to a lot of iconic romance movies with bittersweet or straight up downer endings. Would some more episodes with Stadler have been nice? Of course. He's hot. I would have loved to see him interact with the team more. Again, the Gigi Stadler adventure would slap, but I'm still happy with what I got from him, even if it definitely took time away from the other characters. And on that note, let's unpack the status quo changes that didn't have the best pacing. Right off the bat, Rand taking over Cognito. It happened just a little too soon, in my opinion. I already expressed earlier that we weren't given enough time to connect with the whole team, so it stands to reason that if I'm not super attached to them, I'm not going to be attached to Cognito as a whole. Status quo changes are the most effective when the show's gotten the most out of its current format and the writers need to keep things fresh. But I feel like the version of Inside Job we did have in part 1 only found its identity right before they switched things up. We didn't get enough time to explore Cognito Inc. itself. We could have had more of the team dealing with government conspiracies, and more of JR trying to wiggle his way into the Shadow Board. We could have had Rand interact with the rest of the team before he took over, so things would have felt a little bit more compelling when he took over. I found it kinda lame that everyone kind of shrugged their shoulders, with the reasoning that trading JR for Rand really wasn't going to make much of a difference, especially when it kinda did. If Rand had more time to interact with these characters, he could have used his position of power to more or less bribe everyone into loving him, by hooking them up with things that meet their specific needs, enabling Andre's drug addiction with some experimental shit, letting Gigi design a new lab coat for the company. Mike was already content with the water coolers being filled with vodka, but you get the idea. Seeing Rand's face everywhere, watching him force the team to help with his crazy schemes, it's a really big shift to have so early in the series, especially since Rand's midlife crisis and Reagan's romance arc take away so much focus from Cognito. Rand wants to be put back on top, but we never really explore what that means. Part 2 also splits up Brett and Reagan for most of the season, putting Brett in charge of the team, which becomes a permanent change by the end of the season. It's something that should feel huge, but because a lot of these episodes are laser focused on the personal lives of these characters, we don't really ever see what Brett as a leader means for the show. It's finally touched on in the season finale, as we see how the team struggles to take Brett seriously because he's such a sweetheart, but this should have been addressed a lot sooner. I even feel like the Robes making Reagan partner kinda happened too soon, only because we barely know anything about them. But at the same time, they spin it in a direction where that's the point. Now that Reagan's partner, she thinks she's finally going to know everything. But it would have been cool to have had a few appearances of the Robes outside of their headquarters, where they display some kind of creepy, hard to comprehend feat that makes us wonder, what the hell are they? Stuff to make us theorize and be on the edge of our seat for their next appearance. Instead, it feels like we might have an info dump on their lore in part 3, instead of having it gradually trickle out. Again, it's a lot to pull off in 18 episodes, so of course not everything is going to land perfectly. I don't think it has anything to do with bad writing or anything close to that. It just further proves why these streaming services need to properly invest into animation and focus on giving quality shows as many episodes as they need, rather than giving the green light to a bunch of shows and only keeping around the cheaper to produce animation. With all of this said though, I do think they laid the groundwork for part 3 to be the best season yet. Assuming it does have 10 episodes, there should be room to explore the Robes and the characters in a meaningful way. I love Inside Job, and I'm really rooting for the show. It may have its flaws, but there's no denying it's so refreshing to see in the weird current landscape of adult animated sitcoms. I really can't blame it for being too ambitious for Netflix, because Netflix should have known what the minds behind this show were going to cook up. I can't wait to see the next part. Hopefully, in a year, I'll be counting down the days, okay? I need like an Inside Job advent calendar. Somebody make that merch idea. All of that being said, guys, I'd love to know what you think about all of this. Have you seen the show? Did you love it? Did you not? What did you think about the pacing? What do you think about how Netflix is doing animation? Let us know in those comments down below. We'd love to hear from you. As always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay in the loop with all things animation. And make sure to follow us on Instagram. As always, I'm Nemo. That being said, guys, this was an Inside Job video, and I'll see you next time. Peace.